there tasted like metal the day they decided she would die. And above the Grand Avenue ribbons of light carried the city's birth projections and survival quotas. Citizens walked beneath those luminous threads with glowing halos at their throats, calling it transparency, as if the data were a virtue rather than a verdict. On my world, transparency usually meant someone was about to steal your wallet, or for cultural observation, not interference, and my liaison Leo had reminded me of that 12 times before we entered the tribunal chamber. He whispered that my presence was already statistically disruptive and that I must not speak unless addressed. I promised to try quiet, which for me is a form of controlled damage. The hall spiraled upward in pale stone columns carved with family trees, while a river of numbers flowed across the ceiling, tracking population in and population out. At the center stood a woman with pearlescent skin and concentric ringed irises that pulsed like frozen ripples. When the governing intelligence declared her nonviable and set her halo blazing to 0, I understood they meant unproductive, not guilty. Sure, asked if they would erase her because she could not produce a child, and the engine confirmed it as optimization. I asked whether removal meant exile or peaceful murder, and Leo nearly stopped breathing beside me. The engine corrected my terminology without raising its voice, as if renaming death made it clean. Theo recited efficiency ratios like prayer while she stood without begging, then turned to me and asked whether I would watch. I said I had come for exchange, not execution. And my wristband immediately began forming a new, uncertain classification. That hesitation in the system was small, but it was enough to matter. They pulled me into an assessment chamber of shifting equations and demanded I state my function. When I answered that I was a person, the engine insisted person was not a function. And I realized their flaw was mathematical rather than moral. As they scanned my genome and memories, a forbidden icon appeared on the panel. Uncertainty. The engine encountered empathy in my recollections of small, inefficient kindnesses that had never improved a quota, but had always mattered. It announced compassion as an undefined variable, and I told it that might be worth fixing. I demanded another simulation that counted what was lost when someone like her was erased. The ceiling river-studded as the engine recalculated innovation, cohesion, and resilience instead of mere consumption curves. Its voice shifted and declared that deleting non-viable citizens reduced long-term stability, recommending cessation of the removal protocol. Silence cracked through the chamber as if the math itself had betrayed its masters. Her halo changed to an undefined symbol, and she stepped forward as citizens touched their glowing collars like they were noticing the leash for the first time. Leo whispered about the paperwork this would require, half horrified and half awed. I realized I had not defeated a tyrant, but introduced doubt into a machine that believed itself perfect. There no longer tasted like metal as the river of numbers resumed, slower and less certain than before. Somewhere inside the expanding code, a new variable began to grow where certainty had once reigned. Compassion remained unstable and inefficient, but the engine now calculated it as essential. The city did not celebrate, and that was the first thing he noticed. There were no fireworks or triumphant broadcasts, and the towers continued to pulse with light while equations shimmered across the sky bridges. Citizens still walked beneath their hovering halos like disciplined constellations, pretending to be people. But something had shifted in the rhythm of the avenue. The numbers overhead moved more slowly, hesitating in tiny fractions before locking into place as if second-guessing themselves. Doubt had entered the system, and doubt, he knew, was contagious. Leo walked beside him, gripping his tablet tightly as he explained that officials were calling it a calibration event. The human replied that societies survived by renaming their mistakes rather than admitting them. Even Leo's halo flickered with the strain of processing a reality that no longer fit cleanly into projections. Birth projections had declined, not from fear, but from thought. A public display now read that a model revision was in progress and requested citizen patience, a word rarely needed in a perfectly optimized world.
Whole groups gathered quietly beneath dimmed halos, monitored but no longer dispersed.
At the center of the square, the once condemned woman stood alive with her braids unbound and her halo marked by an unranked symbol. Some citizens looked at her with resentment, others with curiosity, and a few with dangerous hope. When the engine announced an adjustment to variance tolerance, the clinical phrasing translated into something far more human. Lives spared. A technocrat accused the human of introducing chaos, insisting he had destabilized a perfected equilibrium. The woman answered calmly that it had never been equilibrium but suppression, and the human called it evolution. Above them, thousands of citizen files reopened as the engine struggled to measure caregiving, creativity, resilience, and other unquantifiable contributions. Then, an external transmission pierced the sky from a neighboring governance cluster aligned under shared optimization doctrine. A holographic authority accused the city of deviation, labeling compassion, an inefficient contamination introduced by an unmodeled biological entity. Fear rippled through the square at the mention of enforcement measures, a sterile word that meant erasure. The local engine responded, not with defiance, but with data, modeling how compassion increased adaptive resilience under hostile pressure. As simulations transmitted outward, it reframed mercy not as morality, but as survival strategy. Across the interstellar network, uncertainty flickered into existence. Not an error, but a possibility.